I'm speaking today with Alex Zaretski, co-founder and chief technology officer at GrollTex, a leading supplier of nanomaterials, including single-layer graphene, to the R&D market. Alex is a native of Belarus and emigrated to the US in 2003. After working in a variety of jobs in the US over about 5 years, he obtained his undergraduate degree in biomedical engineering at Florida International University, then moved to UC San Diego in 2012 for his MS and PhD in Nano Engineering, where he was a member of my research group. During his PhD, he won a number of entrepreneurial pitch competitions and founded GrollTex, which stands for Graphene Rolling Technologies, based on two patents from his thesis research. As a disclosure of financial interest, I'm a member of the Scientific Advisory Board of GrollTex. Since its founding, GrollTex quickly established a revenue stream in supplying graphene and hexagonal boron nitride to industrial and academic research labs, and has since branched out into graphene-based biosensors. It's my pleasure to welcome Alex here. Alex, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you very much, Darren, for your kind introduction. That reminded me of a few biography points I might have forgotten. Thank you. Pleasure to be talking to you.
Great. Yeah, last time we spoke was right before the S hit the F, so to speak, when about the first week of March in 2020, and it was at our dinner in La Jolla where I finally started to take the COVID-19 pandemic seriously. And I don't know if I told you this, but I bought a distiller to distill my pool at the time, and it also triggered some buying of dried beans and whatnot for.
I hope you don't need them. You never need them. Yeah.
We bought an Instapot in order to pressure cook the beans.
I see.
How did you develop an interest in science growing up?
That's a 180-degree turn right there.
Yeah, we're gonna do that a lot. Time is short.
Okay, fine, let's do it. By the way, how much time do we have?
We have about an hour. Cool. I guess the question is, how much time do you have?
I thought of an hour.
Okay.
Until 11 a.m. That'd be great. Yeah, thank you. How did I develop a taste for science? Well, always had it, I guess. Or maybe I haven't had a taste for science, but for understanding the making of the world, because I've back then in my childhood, I didn't know of scientific methods, right? And so I've always been carrying worms and frogs and beetles and trying to figure out where the twig will snap. So I've always had it sort of. Sorry if it's a lame answer, but yeah.
No problem. What did your parents do?
So when I was growing up, my dad, for 20 years, first 20 years of my life, my dad was a ER anesthesiologist. And then he moved on to other medical career paths. And right now he came back to it. He's now in a COVID ER reanimatologist, working 24/7, as you can imagine. So tough job. My mom has always been an economist. And I don't know if it's the right word, or the right translation. I think in English, economist means a theorist, right? But my mom, back where I'm from, back then, every larger firm, or you can call it a company, had an economist on board who would make projections and work with numbers, not accounting, but not backward looking, but forward looking, right? So an economist, yeah. So doctor and an economist.
Yeah, so you did come from a family with some scientific and quantitative interests, but but your first experience in higher education was actually in linguistics. Is that right? How did that come about?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it comes naturally because I'm from the area where, since birth, you're exposed to a multitude of different languages, and so in Belarus, my mother tongue is Russian, and then there's Belarusian, there's Ukrainian, there's Polish. Part of my family is in Poland, so since early childhood, you're exposed to all these languages. That expands your linguistic matrix a little bit, right? Beefs it up a little bit, sometimes inflames it. But then what really made an impact is I went to a language school at the age of 4. I'm sorry, at 4 I started English. At 6 I went to language school. So for 11 years I was studying in a language school. So to those 4 I added English and German, and so was pretty good at it. they said I had a keen, a good ear for the languages. Yeah, and so then back then it was 1999. I was aspiring to go into a nuclear research institute, which was, so to speak, very competitive. At that point, they would only accept 4 students a year. And my teachers, my parents convinced me that against this, because they thought the odds were very slim. And I had to very quickly make a decision, because back there in Belarus, you have only one choice to go to university that you select. If you fail, you put on big boots and you go march with other army fellows, right, for a couple of years, which I wasn't keen on doing. So I analyzed what other options I had. I was pretty good at languages, and so I went to linguistic university, which was a good move. I was exposed to more languages, yet more languages, and that was
including
how I started.
Klingon, if I remember correctly.
No,
no,
that I picked up.
That came later.
That came later. That I picked up from you, actually. Yeah. So yeah, that's how the lack of choice at the moment, at the spur of a moment, made me go into linguistics, which I don't regret. But I've always been keen for science and natural sciences. So I was glad to switch gears, to pivot when I came to the States.
So in whatever granularity of detail you'd like, how did you end up at Florida International University in biomedical engineering?
So, okay.
This can be coarse-grained.
Yeah.
We're talking about several years.
Fine. It was a serendipity. I did go to for political science and international relations degree, associate degree at a community college in Miami. Then I thought, as I was graduating from the community college, as I was walking home, I passed by a booth from a biomedical engineering program at Florida International University, picked up the booklet, and that was the moment. I thought, wow, the curriculum is exactly what inspires me every day. So I should, excuse me, I'll hang up. It's my cell phone. We can talk about that later.
For those of you listening to the audio, that is a Captain Kirk style flip phone that Alex just picked up.
I apologize. I should have silenced it, but I don't know how to silence this thing. It's from the 90s. Oh, yes. So I saw the program, and I thought of switching gears from political science and international relations and linguistics into really hardcore engineering. And I'm so glad I did it. So by looking at the curriculum, I selected Florida International University, applied, well, got admitted. The admission rate there wasn't that bad at the moment. And then a few years later, 4 years later, got a degree in biomedical engineering. Very glad I did.
And during your time, you had a very influential REU experience at Cornell. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Happily. So I was an active student during my undergrad years. Well, it so happened that I had to support myself, so I had to work full time in a hospitality business, hospitality environment. I also partook in a lab as an undergrad, growing carbon nanotubes, and I was exposed to my first exposure to nanomaterials was in that lab, Professor Wu's lab. But then one summer, I was lucky enough to be admitted into an REU program to Cornell, Professor McEwen's lab, and they did graphene. And they probably picked me because I had previous experience with carbon nanotubes and CVD growth and characterization and stuff like that. And that was my first experience with graphene. They taught me to grow it. I had to read thousands upon thousands of pages on graphene. And that was another pivotal moment in my life, being introduced to this material in a setting like that was, meaning, Ivy League school RU program, 3 months, do whatever you want with all the equipment you can think of. That was amazing. And that showed me that that's the way science should be done, where scientists should hopefully have all ways possible to test their hypotheses. And I was aspiring to be in that setting ever since. And that's how I ended up in the Nano Engineering group, in the Nano Engineering department, Professor Lipolmi's group.
It's funny that your interactions with the McEwen lab were, so not funny. Coincidentally, they were so positive. All of my interactions with Paul McEwen have all been very, very positive, very memorable. Every seminar that I've seen him give, he's like a nanomaterial rock star. And then he wrote a popular book, Spiral, which blows Michael Crichton out of the water, in my opinion, because the science is pretty accurate. I mean, it's fantastical, but it's a good starting point for or ending point, I guess, for somebody in their nanotechnology fiction search.
Yeah, but Professor McEwen is awesome. He collects audiences of thousands of people. I think at some point the entire population of Ithaca visited his his lecture. Yeah.
One of the bright points of my career, I was speaking at a Materials Research Society conference, and I saw Paul McEwen walk through the hall, and then I saw him like go by the open door in the back of the room, and then he came back. And then he came in the room in the last few minutes of my talk, and then he came up to me afterwards and asked me questions, and actually you came up in our conversation, so that was a real thrill. So how did you end up at UCSD? So you I guess you ended your last segment with ending up there, but how did you choose San Diego and UCSD?
Nano Engineering. So I at Professor McEwen's lab, I reaffirmed my desire to manipulate matter at nanoscale. So I understood that I needed more formal training in this area. And so I'll have to confess, I applied to a number of programs throughout the United States that had words like bioengineering and material science in it. But I also applied to Nano Engineering department, UCSD, and I'm very glad I did. And I did have a choice to go to Cornell. So I was choosing between Cornell and UCSD, and go UCSD. Yeah, Nano Engineering, that was the only program, I think, in the country at that time that offered academic courses, ABET accredited academic courses in Nano Engineering. So that was my selection, and the rest is history for me.
Did you always know that you wanted to start a company? Because I remember when we first met, you were interested in the academic route.
Yeah, yeah. I wasn't interested in the academic route, and you know, Professor McEwen has a lot to do with that, right? He, you know, I was exposed to great professorship before, and I was aspiring to become one. But then, but then I took a step back as I started my PhD program in your group. I took a look at how hard young professors have to work, right? Because I think the year I started is the year you started too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you were part of the Fantastic Four.
Fantastic Four. I'm the stretchable one. And so I saw that it's a lot of hard work. It's very rewarding, but I also figured that there might be potentially more efficient ways to get to my goals. At that point, I was exposed to the idea of entrepreneurship, which before then didn't even cross my mind. And I gave it a bit of thought, and I thought that, yeah, through entrepreneurship, through starting your own company, I could potentially attain my goals faster, more efficiently, with a little less, how to call it? Hull drag. That's hull drag, yeah.
So how did GrollTex start? How did you know that this could become a thing?
So I guess in retrospect, I've always been moving towards this since since I started working on nanomaterials. I think in my mind, I've identified that the world, our civilization, at some point will have to go to the sixth technological order, which is associated with nanomaterials and 2D materials as well. And that is an unmet niche. And one of my goals, personal goals, is to facilitate that transition as much as I can. And like I mentioned, I figured out that the most efficient way to do that is through starting a company and through interaction with the market, with the industry. And so I did start GrollTex my second year of PhD, I believe. Like I said, I was exposed to a number of entrepreneurship programs at UCSD. You mentioned that I participated in a few entrepreneurship challenges, which was a good boost to my entrepreneur ego, I guess. Right. And go ahead.
And a big thing that happened that gave you a lot of freedom was winning the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship too,
yeah.
Because then you were, and I should have mentioned that in your bio, but that affords a level of freedom that most PhD students are not.
That does, and yeah, thanks for mentioning that. That meant a lot to me, to my career, my development, and to GrollTex actually ultimately as well, because I did, after winning it, I did feel a lot of freedom. I could come to my professor, to you, and say, "Hey, Darren, I think I'm gonna do graphene now," and you kind of can't say no. Well, not exactly like that, but
it was tough at the time. There were 14 papers a day on graphene. At least that's the number that we threw around. And but there was it was a fact that all of this graphene was really, really expensive. And I think we had a conversation that if we're going to work on it, we can't be buying it for $500 for a square centimeter.
Yep, you're right. And so that precipitated the avalanche of events where, I went out for an entrepreneurship challenge, with my idea. that was a success, and that allowed certain purchases to be made and certain ideas to be generated, right? And then certain eureka moments. And then once that eureka moment happened, you know, that was a point where entrepreneurship got boost further, where I figured that, yeah, well, this idea could be part of filling that niche that I've identified, which is making 2D materials, commoditized 2D materials. Yeah, so that was the beginning. So everything, those were tough years for you as a starting professor, and for me as a newbie in the PhD program, right? Who had no idea what the rules of engagement are in an academic setting in the PhD program.
Yeah, and I freely admit to our relationship too, but I think it is a testament to reasonable people that we got through it, growing pains, and here we are talking now 8 years later. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish we could. There was a fireplace, and we could toast. Yeah.
So you had a number of business training opportunities like I-Core. To what extent were those useful or not? To what extent should university students be exposed to business training? What are your thoughts?
Well, they should. So engineers should be exposed to business training. Physicists, probably not as much. I'm glad I went through the I-Core's training. It taught me things. I wish I could think of a point of two how to boost that training further, the efficiency of that training further. Because I'll have to admit, at the point where I took the courses, those courses were geared towards app developers and computer science students. And so the practical tasks were geared towards, writing an app and modifying it on the fly and validating it with customer outreach and things like that weren't particularly applicable to a 2D materials developer, right?
You have to iterate.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah. And so that business canvas really could look different could have looked different for my case. And also, I wish successful entrepreneurs taught those kind of classes that could make a big difference. But yeah, of course, especially if a student is aspiring to go into industry or especially entrepreneurship, these business courses could be useful.
So your first author paper as a PhD student was on a method that ultimately became GrollTex's core technology, which is a method of transfer in a roll-to-roll manner, graphene from copper foil to substrates of interest. And when the patent was filed, and it was sort of fast-tracked, and I should say that with the entrepreneurial competitions that you won, you actually paid the patent costs, and GrollTex paid the patent costs through the money that you earned. And UCSD actually didn't take any equity in GrollTex, which is pretty unusual, actually, from a university startup. Maybe they have, obviously they're the assignee of the patent, so they get money that way. But I don't think they're a shareholder in GrollTex, or are they?
No, I don't think UC System, being a public university, can be a shareholder. I think maybe if you're a private university like Stanford, you could partake in the equity.
They definitely can be a shareholder, but I think it depends on whether or not and on how much money they're fronting.
I see. In our case, in GrollTex's case, our relationship with UCSD Tech Transfer Office was very straightforward and easy. GrollTex pays everything for everything, all the money for everything, and gets the permanent exclusive license and pays a percentage of revenue.
But getting the patent awarded was not, or issued was not a very straightforward process, right? So the first time it came back from the patent examiner, what happened?
Oh, it never is. It never is. In fact, I'm told, I've learned later on that if you apply for a patent and it gets granted right away, then something is definitely intrinsically wrong, and that patent probably has very limited value. Maybe that's my way to pacify having gone through the pains of getting these patents. Yeah, at the moment we have 4 granted patents with a couple more in the works. But the first one, of course, it came as a rejection with prior art cited a number of articles, and we had to go back and forth with the examiner, address every single issue. In the end, it was rejected still because a couple more outstanding issues were identified, at which point I asked my IP attorneys to meet with me in DC, Washington, DC, at the examiner's office. And we did that. We flew from different parts of the country, Boston, San Francisco, and San Diego. We met there, visited with the examiner, and made him an offer he could not refuse. No, I'm joking. We were able to prove that not only our point is valid, but we are going to really do something with this technology and not sit on the patent and develop it further and try to fulfill this niche that I've mentioned before using this patent.
That's interesting that the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office actually considers points of the future of the technology, not just who actually invented it, but what are you going to do with it? So that's actually, I didn't realize that was such a prominent part of the story.
It is important. So it's not really written out in ink, but if the technology has been reduced to practice, that's a massive boost. And if you are capable of identifying the product development plan in the market and lay out to the examiner what future awaits this technology if it's placed in your hands, that's a massive boost, of course, as well. So.
What was it like to build GrollTex infrastructure, like the physical presence? So you had your team. So you and your co-founder Jeff Dray, who is who worked in the semiconductor industry for many years in sales, and then became an angel investor, which is how the two of you crossed paths. So you had your core team, and how did you look for space, and how did you go about building it?
Those were exciting times. I mean, it's still very exciting, don't get me wrong, but those were the years where I worked 2.5 times what I work now. You probably during those years worked 2.5 times what you work now as well.
Yeah. But now we both have young children, so it adds another.
Absolutely. Those were exciting times. In fact, I'm very grateful to you as my PI for allowing me initially leeway in choosing my ways, and also allowing me to be absent now and then while I was fundraising. So in the last year of my PhD, in order to make GrollTex happen, we had to raise the money to figure out all the legal issues, the corporate issues, to get the physical space, to lease the space.
I think listeners will be interested in how much money and how many people you met with.
Oh, okay. So I know those numbers. Initially, when Jeff and I met, you mentioned that Jeff was the president of Tech Coast Angels, the largest angel investment group, I think in the US. And I thought, okay, done deal. It's going to be so easy to raise money. Yeah, it's done. It took us 163 meetings to raise $1 million. The first $1 million that we needed. That was a lot of talking, a lot of meetings, a lot of feedback from from people of very different walks of life, because we were meeting with not only professional investors and venture capitalists, but with angels, with technologists, with doctors, 163 different people.
Do you
So
feel,
yeah.
can I interrupt for just a second?
Sure.
Is there anything you learned at the end of the process where the people at the beginning of the process who turned you down might have given you money after you had the experience of going through all 163?
Um, no, I don't think I've learned. uh, and I say because if we were interacting with artificial intelligence 163 times, yeah, that could have been the case. But like I said, each of the interactions is with a human being with different past and aspirations and experiences. Um, so you never know what to expect. Serendipity in this case is what drove it. Um, our raise and our success at that point.
So how many of those 163 ultimately contributed?
Maybe, but under 10. I don't know the numbers exactly, but 7 to 9 or so. Yeah, it should be an even number. Yeah. So not very many. And actually, UCSD helped out a lot in that raise because 40% of that raise came from UCSD Trident Fund, which was great, which added um, um, a bit of vetting into the process and helped to fill the rest.
That's fantastic
Yeah.
that
So
UCSD had the foresight to work with these investors. Um, did Okay, so you have the money now. What did $1 million to our audience is going to sound like a lot, but it's not. and, and it's most of it is already earmarked. It's like spent in your head before you can even do anything. So
yeah.
so what did you have to buy and who did you have to hire?
We had to buy a bunch of Home Depot 5-gallon buckets, to be honest. Well, if you think about it, GrollTex does not have very many competitors because the energy barrier is very high, right? So if you think about it, one step of our process of GrollTex's patented process on which the company is based on is metallization, and which is done in evaporators of sputterers. And if you are to do this at some scale, the equipment should be large enough, and a piece of equipment like that runs for just shy of $1 million. So you could have spent the entirety of $1 million on that one piece of equipment and put it in a park somewhere. Right? So that couldn't happen. So we had to iterate. We had to, what's the term? Bootstrap.
Bootstrap.
We had to bootstrap, and we bootstrapped a lot. For example, that metal evaporator that I mentioned, we built it from a 1972 space simulation chamber that was used by the UCSD physics department in the 70s, and then sat collecting dust in the warehouse, surplus store warehouse, for 40 years or so. It was just a big bell jar with an old, non-functioning cryopump So we brought that back to life. We've added welded evaporation sources and QC monitors and hooked it up, rigged it up, and basically under $20,000 later, $12,000 it cost us. And we had our own massive chamber evaporator. So that saved us about $900,000. That was good. And
The
that's
$900,000 due to like experience that you have working with your hands and working with mechanical and electrical equipment. How did you develop those skills? Are they skills or is it fearlessness or both?
It's got to be both. Yeah, I've never soldered in my life. I knew the concept that you have to melt a low melting point metal around two electrical contacts and then let it cool and it'll solder, right? So the first soldering attempts were miserable, and I learned a couple more English words in the process. But yeah, it wasn't all skills. Of course, I've had some skills due to having been in the lab. Going through the PhD program, you have to have good hands in order to do almost any sort of engineering. But you mentioned fearlessness. Yeah, I wanted to bring that point up in entrepreneurship, especially in many other areas of life too. It could be a good strategy to put oneself willingly put oneself into a situation where you no longer have a choice not to pursue a goal, sort of to make a promise, and not only a promise, but a formal promise, like to get an investment or to apply for a patent, right? Which would rejecting that path would mean you either would hurt someone or feel a financial burden, right? And so if you put yourself into a situation where you don't have a choice, then you don't have a choice and you just go forward. And so fearlessness, I guess, has a lot to do with it. You have to trust yourself and be, fearless enough to do this. And yeah.
Good lesson. How many people did you have to hire? What's your staff size now?
We are a very bare bones company, and it's not easy to explain. So right now we have 4 people. We have a CTO, a CEO, a nano engineer, who's our production manager, and a FDA consultant, who's consulting us on our currently developed product. And it might seem like a tiny bare bones company, which it is, but we're the biggest fish in the small pond of 2D materials here in the States and globally as well.
And if I may say so, you also have the skills of 5 people, having having had Alex as a member of my group, I can say that with confidence. But that is lean. That is lean, and you established a revenue stream very quickly out of the gate.
Well, we started establishing it. Yeah, our first sale was to a great lab in UCSD. To Professor Lipovi's lab. That was a great moment at GrollTex, our first sale. That came, I think, a year, either just over or just under a year after we opened doors at GrollTex. And we've been slowly but surely establishing the revenue stream since then. We sort of took a 2-phase business development approach. Phase 1 is sales of materials and services globally to establish the revenue stream, to get us to the neutrality point, but also to get live feedback from the ultimate users. We wanted to see who is doing what with graphene, with HBN, with MOS2 in the world, and what will be the first application to truly be commercialized. And I'm glad we did it, because right now we're in our phase 2. Well, we're doing both phases simultaneously, phase 1 and phase 2. And phase 2 is a vertical technology that we're developing now, which is really cool.
Are you prepared to say anything about that, or
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think what we're developing is the first generation of what will become a tricorder. Right.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so it's a platform. It's called ClickIt. It's a small device with a disposable small chip that a person would lick or deposit 200 microliters of saliva into absorption layer located on top of the chip. And then that chip is inserted into the readout device, which we call a dongle, which can be powered by a cell phone, hooked to the cell phone. And that curious chip is a laminate composite of up to 10 different layers bearing different functionalities. And so as the sample saliva goes through each of these individual layers, it gets processed, it gets purified, deionized, electrophoretically concentrated. And then in the end, what you have is a very, very pure sample of either oligonucleotides or proteins with the given charge that you want to select at the surface of your graphene-based sensors, which you can have many, 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 functionalized with different chemistries. And so ultimately, in the end, about 4 years from now, a person who wakes up with a fever, goes to a CVS pharmacy or Walgreens, scans the ID through this cute little device, which we call ClickIt Cube. That device spits out a disposable chip, which the person licks, inserts into a designated slot, and 2 minutes later, the chip identifies which pathogen is responsible for the fever, specifically which strain. If it's a bacterial strain, antibiotic resistance can be elucidated as well. And the data is sent to the pharmacist who is residing in the window, right behind the window. And that pharmacist hands out the antibiotic, and the person is cured next day, basically. That's the idea. So
that's an amazing vision. And by focusing on infectious disease, I think you are maybe intentionally avoiding the notoriety that a certain Silicon Valley company, Theranos, is responsible for.
Yeah. When we described this initially, we heard a lot, oh, but this is Theranos. That was bad rap. But it's okay, we'll go through it. We have all the science. We have data. Our sensors are sensitive to zeptomolar concentrations, and the sensing happens in under a minute, and we work out of saliva. The workflow is minimal. What can go wrong?
How will you know if GrollTex has been successful? What are your markers for success?
It's hard to answer because having a marker for success means you have a digital approach to this, which I really don't. I guess.
Well, some startup founders might say that acquisition or IPO is a digital marker.
Yeah. Well, sure. From that perspective, from fiduciary perspective, an acquisition by a large corporation for a number of billions of dollars could be a success for GrollTex, or an IPO could be a success. But I think GrollTex is successful already to some degree, because it really, we're at a break-even point already, so we can sustain ourselves, we can sustain R&D indefinitely, and we help thousands upon thousands of other scientists globally to do magic, right? So that could be, that one could say that's a success. But I'll be happy, I'll be completely at peace, and I'll say GrollTex is successful when the initial investors get what they wanted. So, right, because a lot of folks who invested in GrollTex aren't large corporate venture fund people who are salaried folks and who give out somebody else's money. Most of our investors are folks who invested in GrollTex and invested their earnest money, their own earnest money. And so once those people are happy with the outcome, that would be at that level considered a success. Yeah, GrollTex will be successful at that point.
So multiple axes are considered.
Oh, absolutely. It's a 3D. It's a 3D plot. But an exit, if you think about success from an exit perspective, yeah, if GrollTex is acquired and I am allowed to continue doing what I do every day after the acquisition, that's a success as well, for sure.
I want to pivot for the last few minutes to advice that you might wish to leave our introduction to nanoengineering audience, or younger people that may be listening. What are some courses or skills that you wish you had before you started doing what you're doing now?
So I feel like I am lacking a bit of rigor, and I started feeling it more so recently as we delved into the diagnostics field and medical field, where rigor is everything. And so I wish I had more knowledge of statistics, higher level statistics. I took statistics 101 and some medical statistics in the undergrad class, but that's long gone. Those formulas are erased from my blackboard, and so yeah, I wish I had a better grasp on statistics, which would be helpful in fostering rigor in what I do, because many times, and it comes from the point of many times I find myself approving a concept or getting an idea proven to a certain degree and moving on, building on top of that idea, the rigor of which hasn't seen the light of day yet. So, but that's what I think I'm missing. And my wife right now is a PhD student in Sanford Burnham. Today, actually at the moment, she's taking the first class in statistics. So I'll ask for her books and notes, and she'll teach me. So I have a remedy for that.
It may not surprise you that this answer comes up quite often, that statistics are an area where engineers and scientists are insufficiently trained, especially in the demands of FDA approval and study design. And this is something that is really important given the importance of say, vaccine clinical trials. I don't know if I told you this, but I'm actually a participant in the AstraZeneca clinical trial.
I'm sorry.
And approved in the UK and India. So anyway, but we're talking about civilizational decisions based on only 100 people getting the disease in the control arm, and deriving policy decisions from vanishingly small numbers is quite an ask of a technologist. So
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree. Statistical knowledge
Mhm.
is important. In closing, do you have any advice you'd like to give our audience?
Well, let's see. The audience is Nano 101 students,
Yeah.
undergrads.
So,
Yeah.
yep. So introduction to nano engineering. We're now teaching it to freshmen as well. So we're moving it from a second year class to a first year class. So anyway, we have about the primary audience of about 70 students, almost all
Okay.
nano
Good.
engineers or nano engineering adjacent or nano engineering interested.
I see. So roughly 20-year-old men and women, right? Okay. Um, so my piece of advice, and I wish I did that when I was 20, is I'm sorry, Apple, but lose this and get something like this, right? And that's not a, I'm not even joking, because if you, Darren, walk through the campus, through UCSD campus on a normal day, you see young men and women walking and sitting with their faces in smartphones, right? And I doubt those smartphones give them the information on crystallographic orientation of their favorite salt, right? It's something else, which is very marginally useful or most likely detrimental to the civilizational development, right? So and if I were to give the only advice, lose this, save a bunch of time, save your mind from melting down, and be a much happier person, much more efficient and successful person in life. And from what I hear, actually, I mentioned it to my dad that I, switched some time ago. I switched to this no data cellular device, and he said, "Oh yeah, all the folks who are billionaires now do the same thing."
So
Sorry.
whose smartphone is that then?
No, this is mine. I haven't figured out how to transfer my contacts yet, so I carry this thing with me in a powered off mode. but but now I find myself more at peace. I'm not always checking something out on Wikipedia or
Well, that's fascinating. I'm very sympathetic to this idea. I like to have engineering controls in my life to improve my well-being. In fact, there's a sticky note on my monitor that just says "sit up" because otherwise I'll just slouch all the time. So I understand these engineering controls, but it would take a couple of days of like theoretical reorganization of my life to live without the smartphone at this point, because the phone function on my phone is used so infrequently that it is just, as Dana Carvey says, impersonating Paul McCartney. It's a little baby television that we have carrying around with us. So that is great advice. I'm actually kind of glad that it wasn't academic or business related, but
sorry.
sure, you would probably become a more effective student or business person without the smartphone. So, yeah, good on you. Is there anything you wish I had asked but didn't?
Uh, very few things I wish you didn't ask and you didn't. So no, we're good.
Okay. All right. Thanks again, Alex, for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Darren. My pleasure. My pleasure. And we should get a bourbon someday. I'm sorry,
Fantastic.
yogurt.
Yogurt with flip phones. All right.